Hey guys, so today's episode I have an absolutely fantastic interview to bring with you. I talked to Lee from Trailside Fitness, who's another personal trainer who specialises in hikers and backpackers preparing for their adventures. Now I first came across Lee online when I saw a few of his articles getting shared around on Facebook, and it was talking about injury prevention for hiking. And as I've said previously, it is quite difficult to find really quality information on these subjects, and most of the stuff out there being written is just being written by guys who've gone out and have done a couple of hikes here and there and who don't really have any idea behind exercise science or physiology, and they don't really have the qualifications to be talking about what they need to be doing. But Lee was completely on the other end of the spectrum. The stuff he was saying was absolutely fantastic. It was smack bang on, and not only he's got that great background as a hiker and a backpacker, but he's had so much experience in the fitness and physiotherapy worlds as well. So his stuff was really, really quality. Now today's episode is absolutely jam-packed with fantastic information. We go through a whole bunch of stuff around physical preparation for hiking, injury prevention for the trail, a little bit of nutrition, and a little bit of mental strength as well. So every single minute today is really, really jam-packed with value. So I hope you get some good quality information out of here and enjoy the episode. Hey, my name is Rowan Smith and I want to welcome you to the Training for Trekking podcast. Now this is the world's very first podcast which is entirely dedicated to helping you train, prepare and conquer your upcoming hike, trek or mountain adventure. So once a week I'm going to be giving you quality and practical information on the subjects of physical preparation for trekking, dealing with altitude and nutrition on the trail, so you can know everything you need to be doing to have the best chance of a safe, enjoyable and successful adventure. So now you know what you're in for. Let's get into today's episode. Welcome, Lee. Thanks for coming on the show.
Thank you. Glad to be here.
So I'm really, really stoked to get you on here today because there's so much confusion around these topics of physical preparation and injury prevention around hiking and trekking and all of that. And there aren't, as we were just saying before we got on the show, there aren't a huge amount of people out there giving some quality and evidence-based information. So when I came across you online, I was absolutely stoked to see your stuff. You got some really, really amazing articles. So it's going to be good fun to pick your brains today, I think. To start with, can you just tell us and the listeners a little bit about yourself, your background in the world of hiking, and then what you actually do?
Yeah, so I'm the owner at Trailside Fitness. My background is in physical therapy and personal training. I've been working in physical therapy for about 5 years and a personal trainer since 2016. I've got about 20 years of backpacking experience, and between the backpacking and my education, it's kind of a unique platform to be able to help hikers and trekkers be able to do their long distance hikes or their mountain climb with less injury and just be able to complete their trek.
Yeah, love that. Love that. And where are you based, out of curiosity?
I'm in Seattle, Washington.
Seattle, Washington. Beautiful. And then starting up Trailside Fitness, what was the sort of inspiration behind that?
Yeah, so we were preparing to hike the Pacific Crest Trail, my wife and I, in 2018. And fall of 2017, I was doing some research, trying to figure out what the best pack was and sleeping bag and all the usual hiker stuff. And I came across a website that did an annual hiker survey. And a couple of the questions that he asked really stuck out to me. And one of them was, did you complete your hike, yes or no? And if the answer was no, why didn't you finish? And injury is the number one reason consistently in his survey. If you scroll further down his survey, there was another question that said, what advice would you give to future hikers? And the top 5 every year, the order changed slightly, but it was, I wish I had trained more before I left. And then nutrition matters, like the quality of food counts. And those 2 things stuck out to me as well. Just realizing that people aren't training and they're eating poorly, and that's kind of contributing to the reasons that they're not finishing the trail and maybe finding injury where they'd hope to avoid it.
Yeah, okay. That's super interesting because I haven't actually seen that survey before, so I might have to look into that. For all the Aussie listeners over here, they might not actually know what the Pacific Crest Trail is, so do you mind diving into that very briefly?
Yeah, so it is a long-distance trail in the United States that runs from the border of Mexico into Canada, and it's 2,650 miles or about 4,300 kilometers. So it's a good bit of distance, yeah. It takes the average hiker about 5.5 months to complete it, but you basically walk all the distance of California, Oregon, and then Washington.
Yeah, all right. So yeah, not a light undertaking to get involved with.
Not at all.
So it's no wonder people are breaking down with some injuries there, hey?
Oh, goodness, yeah.
Oh, mate. All right. All right. Well, moving forward then. So when it comes to, physical preparation and injury prevention for hikers, have you got any sort of, broad philosophies that you follow with your training and your education?
Yeah, and in no particular order, I think strength, endurance, and cardio are the three pieces you're going to need. And those are going to change kind of in a linear fashion as you're hiking. You'll need less strength, but your endurance will pick up. You'll need maybe a little less cardio depending on where you're at with the terrain. And typically your cardio is going to be in that like sub-maximal effort anyway. So having like amazing cardio isn't really going to be a huge benefit to you for some of these long distance hikes. Some of the other things that can really help is just building in some volume throughout the day. So I'll have a lot of my clients work on just doing some squats. So like, for example, doing 12 squats an hour for an 8-hour workday is 96 squats. You do another dozen at lunch and you're over 100 for the day. So you're able to build in some volume, even if you feel like you don't have a lot of time to train. And I think those little things can help add up to getting you prepared to do such a big undertaking like a long distance hike.
I really love that. What do you? So I recommend some similar things in the sense of if people don't have much time to prepare, they might just try to fit in extra steps wherever they can if they literally just don't have time to get out on the trail and train. What do you say to people when they say, well, what is actually 12 squats an hour going to be doing? Like, how do you explain that to your clients?
So we just go over like general fitness, like, just trying to improve your overall fitness base to reduce your risk of injury. So if you tell them 12 squats an hour, one, it doesn't sound like a lot. Two, it's not enough to make you sweaty and red-faced. And three, you're going to build in some strength and some endurance throughout your day. So it's kind of a sneaky way to get some of that stuff in there. And once they hear you can get like an extra 100 squats without like a lot of effort, I think that's an easy buy-in to get some extra work done.
Yeah, I love that. I might have to steal that, mate. I really do like that because I know one of the big problems a lot of people at least coming to see me and talking to me is that they just don't have time to follow a traditional preparation program. So over this side of the world, I don't know if it's the same, maybe your side, but for a lot of the big adventures people step into, they'll get given these pre-made programs by people, but they usually 9 times out of 10 is just like, walk for 2 hours, 3-4 times a week. And it's as much as it's great if you can fit that in, but it's not incredibly practical for a lot of people who are working big 40, 60-hour weeks with a family and a social life as well. So I do like that way of going about it and just fitting a little bit extra in where you can. And over the long term, there's all that extra volume. So, yeah, I love that.
Yeah. Another piece I think is a lot of people will say, oh, I just don't have time. I know you're not a huge fan of like the high intensity interval training. And I'll say for long distance hiking, I'm not either. But I think if someone is really limited on time and just having 20 minutes to do a workout, I think you can get some decent strength benefits and help improve your cardio enough in that 20 minutes that it's worth doing instead of just saying, I don't really have any time. I don't want to do anything because I can't do anything in 20 minutes. So I think just getting something out there for people to do and say, oh, okay, I can do like the squats during the day or I can do a 20-minute workout and still get some benefit is pretty educational for them.
Yeah, I completely agree with that. That's probably, as you said, not as a general sense, a huge fan of the higher intensity stuff. I got 3 reasons why I tend to include in people's programs, and that's the top one is just if you only got 20 minutes, well, you're going to get a reasonable amount of work done in that time. So, yeah, that's a very, very good point to make. So moving on, I reckon, when it comes to physical prep for hiking and trekking and backpacking and all of that, what do you think is really not done well in the hiking world and in the adventure community in general?
I think it's kind of a two-way tie between recovery and specificity. So I think a lot of hikers are getting better at doing something, but to train, but not really the recovery piece, whether it's just stretching or some type of yoga or some sort of mobility piece to help them recoup and get ready for their next session. And then specificity, so doing something that's specifically going to help you with hiking, like lunges or squats or hiking. A lot of folks that I run into are they'll just jog specifically for hiking, which there are a few benefits like increased tendon and ligament strength, but there's also a lot of cons, like a really high injury rate. and just no direct carryover to hiking. Just because you can jog 12 miles doesn't mean you're going to be able to hike 12 miles or 10 miles with ease and comfort. They're completely different in terms of stress for the body and loading response that happens. So I think just working more on the good exercises and then a recovery piece.
Okay, I like that. We're going to dive into a little bit more on that, I think. So recovery piece in specific, like what do you, as a real general recommendation, if someone was, say, they were doing all the training on point, they were working really hard, but they didn't have any of that recovery stuff in their week, what would be a couple of easy things they might be able to include?
Just some easy mobility work. So taking like a lacrosse ball and targeting the base of the hamstrings, some sort of recovery work for the calf muscles, like even a foam roller can be effective, or a lacrosse ball there as well. Sitting on your heels just to help stretch out the front of your legs and get those ankles moving a little bit. There's some really great stretches you can do that are going to target like the core and the shoulders and really open up the back a little bit. So just some of those things that tend to get tight, especially with some training, like consistent training, that can lead into injury. It's nice to address those areas beforehand, just kind of keep you supple and moving and ready for the next session.
Yeah, that's great. Because I've definitely over my side as well. So many people tend to miss that, and they usually end up playing catch up. And when something does go wrong, then they're trying to get on top of it and doing everything they can. But quite often that's a lot longer battle than if they'd just taken the time to do this recovery as a regular thing. So that's a really, really good point to make. For the specificity, that really made me remember a great story of one of my old clients who he was training for Kilimanjaro last year, and he came to me and he had all this experience of he was a very experienced high-level hockey player. He was also a very experienced trail runner, and so he was doing the majority of his training doing those two things. And he came to me and we sort of talked about the specificity and got him doing a bit more specific stuff of hiking and particular strength training and all that jazz. Then he had another mate who was very, very similar in the same story, and he just thought, look, I'm just going to do my running, I'm just going to do this and that and go up on the mountain. And then they just noticed a massive difference when they were there, purely for exactly what you said. Like, running is good, but it's you can't really compare it to the same as going up a hill all day with a heavy backpack or whatever it may be. So next up, so we talked about recovery specificity. Is there anything else that you don't think is really not done enough in the adventure world?
I think just actual quality training. I think people know they need to do something, but they're not really sure what to do. Like you said, there's maybe some programs available, but they leave people hanging. Maybe they've got an injury already, or they're 50 and they've got some knee pain, and the program doesn't really fit what they need. So they may do less exercise than what's really required. So I think just focusing on actual exercises and preparing the body physically as well as mentally to do a long distance hike. It's easy to fall into the trap of like looking at what pack you should take and what jacket is better and what brand sleeping bag you need. Like, that stuff makes you feel productive when it comes to getting ready for a hike, but it actually does nothing to the actual outcome. No one is ending their hike because they got a 20-degree sleeping bag instead of a 10-degree sleeping bag. Like, that's not the reason someone ends. It's usually because of injury, or they just mentally aren't prepared to handle the hike itself. So spending some time just working on that mental and physical training before they go.
Yeah, okay. I like that as well. I like it all so far. It's music to my ears. Because anyone who's gone on to Google, first thing you pop in is, what backpack do I need or what boots do I need? And it's just a rabbit hole, isn't it? So.
Oh, yeah. And the trick is, like, it feels productive. You feel like you're doing something good, but in the end, it doesn't matter. It's just not as important as you think it is.
I quite often get people listening to this show. Cause in my original episode, I was like, look, I'm talking about physical preparation, I'm talking about nutrition, I'm talking about attitude, but I'm not going to be talking about gear, because there's so much information out there and it's just a rabbit hole. But every single episode I get people emailing me going, what do you recommend for this and this? And I'm like, that's not my forte there. I'm going to steer clear of it. But you mentioned mental toughness. So is there anything you could recommend if someone was looking at the mental strength training or mental toughness development? Because that's often talked about generally, which it's, everyone does need it. But quite often people equate that, at least in my experience, to doing, these silly sessions where they'll do burpees for an hour, or they'll, jump on a box for 30 minutes or something like that, just because it's super, super tough, that it's going to build that mental toughness. But I get a bit of issue with that in the sense that you're building that toughness, but it's also a relatively high risk of injury. So if there was someone who was wanting to build, mental toughness, what would a direction you'd point them in?
So there's the website called The Trek, and the guy who runs it, Zach Davis, wrote a book specifically on the mental side of hiking. I believe it's called, there's two. There's Appalachian Trials, and then there's the Pacific Crest version. It's basically the same thing. He just made it more PCT specific. But he talks specifically about the mental side of it, like how to roll with the punches, not against them, and just gives hikers a good general mental strategy. Like, what is your why for the hike? Why are you doing this? How are you going to feel if you don't finish? What are your friends and family going to think of you if you don't finish? Like, he really exposes you to a lot of these common questions, or maybe less common questions, that get you thinking about why you're actually doing this hike. And that can actually help build your resolve before you go. People are also generally wired to be negative thinking. It's just the way the brain processes information. We always have a slant toward the negative. And if you're hiking and you're having a bad day, the trick is not wanting to quit on that day. It's just reframing your expectation, or reframing something like, yep, it's raining and it's windy and it's cold and this really sucks, but you know what? I have one packet of Nutella that I'm ready to dive into and I get to camp, or I got a nice hot meal coming, or whatever those small things are, right, that make the difference. But a lot of hikers will cite that mental piece as a reason for quitting the trail. And then that post-trail depression also tends to be really bad in hikers for a couple reasons. One of them is the lack of endorphins when they finish their hike, which are kind of the good hormones you get from exercise. And then two, the serotonin levels are off in the body. And serotonin is that happy hormone, and 90% of that is produced in the gut. So your gut and your brain are linked together. The gut is actually known as the second brain. If you're feeding your body with like the traditional hiker food, like Pop-Tarts and ramen and potatoes and candy and the stuff that doesn't give you like any actual nutrients, you feed the bad gut bacteria and you offset the balance of the stuff that creates that serotonin. So when you get off trail, your neurochemicals are way out of whack, as well as that huge serotonin drop, and people will get just massively depressed when they come off trail. So a lot of the work I do here with hikers also is educating them on nutrition and how to eat healthier on the trail to help decrease that big drop off when they get back.
Okay, fantastic. Like that's opened up a whole different can of worms. So very, very interesting, all of that. I've looked at the stuff on the Trek quite a bit, but I've never actually seen that book. So I might have to buy it and have a read through, because that sounds incredibly interesting. But let's stay with that nutrition thing. So what would be an easy swap for someone who's used to those traditional, simple, not so nutritious foods on the trail, but something that might keep everything a little bit nicer when they get off? What would be a simple swap you'd recommend?
So there's some really easy things you can do with like fats specifically. So like pine nuts are lightweight and really nutrient dense, and they pack a lot of good fat. Olive oil is another great fat source, because fats tend to be really limited on the trail. There's some really great freeze-dried organic meats you can purchase that are just chicken or just beef, and those work as a nice like base for meals. So my wife and I would use like couscous as our base for the meal. We'd add in some pine nuts, some sun-dried tomatoes. We'd pack out a bag of spinach, because that'll last for a couple of days on trail, no problem. We'll add in the olive oil and whatever freeze-dried vegetables we want that feel good. But just really loading it up with whatever stuff that is going to be more nutrient dense than something that's like ramen noodle, which has like nothing of nutrient value. It's just empty calories, and that's not going to help the body recover at all. We even took a shelf-stable probiotic, so it didn't have to be refrigerated. And about every other day, we'd eat one of those to help keep the gut bacteria in check. And then even when you get to a town to resupply, before we decided to have a pizza or beer, we'd eat a big green salad, have some kombucha or something else fermented, just sneaking in those little things as we go to help kind of buffer that end result. Because your body is going to be pretty depleted after 4,300 kilometers of hiking in terms of like whatever reserves it's got to just help keep you moving forward.
Yeah, all right. well, there we go. And there's all that stuff that you're mentioning. It's not incredibly difficult, is it? Like, as much as it's not as easy as just snacking on a thing of gummy bears, it's not the hardest thing in the world if you put a bit of thought to it. Love it, mate. This is I'm absolutely loving this interview. So I'm a happy man right now. So I want to talk a little bit about injuries now. So I know a big part of your Trailside Fitness is injury prevention and dealing with injuries. Previously, on a couple of podcasts already, we've dove into knee pain quite a bit, but I want to talk about feet a little bit. And in particular, probably, in my opinion, I think the second most common thing after knee pain is probably plantar fasciitis in the hiking world. But you see so many people, try to self-diagnose this over either Google or those Facebook groups where everyone pops in and gives their opinion. And I think that's actually how I came across your information. I think it was on a Facebook hiking group and someone was giving some bizarre recommendations and someone else recommended an article that you wrote. And I was like, this is really, really good stuff. Yeah, I'm pretty sure that's how it first came about. But anyway, what are some of the issues that if people do try to self-diagnose this and even self-treat this?
Well, I think they may actually be overlooking what's causing the issue. So yeah, you may or may not have plantar fasciitis, and unless you have a more thorough diagnosis or evaluation, you're just throwing darts at the wall. Like, you don't really know what you're treating. Is it the shoe that's the problem? Is it foot weakness? Is it foot mobility? Is it ankle mobility? Is it something that's coming from the hip or even from the low back? So starting with just like addressing some of the things that it may be, you can stop hiking and you can, massage your foot a little bit and think that helps, or maybe change your shoes or change your insole and think that does it, but you're still not really addressing the root cause. And until that's investigated a little bit further, you're really just kind of chasing your tail. And that's a big issue, is just trying to like self-diagnose and self-treat. Those Facebook groups can be helpful, but they're also rated as the least hiker-friendly resource available, which if you spend any time in those groups, you know what I mean. I mean, someone says, I think I have plantar fasciitis, and there's 80 people with 80 opinions, and 70% of them are garbage, and the 30% that are gold are just completely overlooked. And it's like, oh my goodness. So it's an exercise in patience and frustration when you go into those groups sometimes.
Oh, mate, yeah, tell me about it. All right, that's really good. If someone did genuinely have plantar fasciitis, so say they went and got it diagnosed by a podiatrist or a physio or whatever, and they knew they had it, what are some of the things that might be helping them with their recovery, or even helping it, stopping it happening again in the future?
So hopefully with an accurate diagnosis, they can start to address the root cause. And typically it's happening from the foot. Overpronation is kind of a term that's been thrown out there, and it's maybe a little overused for some folks. And really, it's just explain that the foot over flattens when you put weight on top of it. And that over time can lead to irritation to this big, thick connective tissue on the bottom of your foot. So unless you get some strength in your foot to help support the arch and keep it from over flattening, you're going to continue to have the issue. Now, orthotic is sort of nice because it gives you a little bit of support for that arch, but it's just a short-term fix. It's not a long-term solution. So hopefully they've got whoever's been diagnosed has a good physio that they're seeing, or a doctor that's giving them some foot strengthening exercises to start with. Looking at their shoe choice, a lot of hikers like these zero-drop shoes, which can be good if you've got the calf and Achilles range of motion to handle them. If not, it's going to be a problem for you. And then looking at calf tightness itself, like just being able to massage and work the calf out using a trekking pole. There's another technique I use called the bone saw, which is about as pleasant as it sounds, where you basically take one shin and drive it into your opposite calf while you're sitting on it. But sounds pleasant, right? But if you really are able to find those spots that are tender and tight, and then you can self-adjust pressure to actually have it be beneficial, not just like a grind session trying to work through this beef jerky tissue you've got back there. So I think just having a good game plan with foot strength, maybe an orthotic, some calf work, and maybe even ankle range of motion to really get you like lined up for success long term.
Yeah, perfect. Like I think the majority of people listening, if they've dealt with it, they probably, out of those four things, at most, they probably tried to do one thing at a time. And, as with all these things, it's never turns out to be an isolated issue, does it? There's always other things going on. That'll be hopefully a good eye opener for a few people listening. So you talked about massaging with the trekking pole and with the bone saw. So let's dive into a little bit more about that. So if someone actually was on the trail and they were suffering from a little bit of muscle soreness or even a little bit of pain, what are some things they could actually do to help relieve this?
So if you're having some pain on the trail, I think it's important to look above and below whatever's hurting. So you mentioned knees before. If your knee's hurting, it's probably an ankle, foot problem, or it's a hip problem. And that knee is just kind of the squeaky wheel. The same with like the foot. If you're having a foot pain, it's probably coming from the ankle, maybe even your big toe that's causing the issue, or something like on the outside of your calf, a muscle that's really tight and creating some tendonitis further down on the bone where that tendon attaches. So easy techniques are just massage, search around, look far up your calf if you're having foot pain, dig deep, work the outside and the inside edges of your calf, work the shin. If you're even stretching, so like sitting on your heels is a really great one to just work on that ankle mobility piece. We'll use trekking poles a lot for massage. Smooth river rocks work really well. They have a nice edge to them. They're not sharp and jagged, so you can really like get a good massage with those for tight areas. I've used logs before. I've used bigger rocks. I've had my wife stand on my calf when I had a tight calf issue. I just couldn't get on my own, so which she was admittedly a little excited for. So, but it turned out okay. So, but sometimes you need that extra little bit of pressure, or you just communicate like, yep, a little bit harder, a little bit less pressure, or further up, further down, and you can actually work through a lot of issues just with that communication piece and finding some of those tight areas that need to be addressed. Yeah,
nice, and that's pretty simple for the majority of people to do. I always recommend get your water bottle out and do the same thing. So that's good to hear. I made the mistake one time of asking someone else to massage my calves with a water bottle or a foam roller, but it was my good mate I was living with at the time, and he took it as an opportunity to absolutely batter me. So I've never gone down that road again.
Definitely a proceed with caution maneuver.
Yeah, there we go. The word of warning on the podcast. So I want to talk about, I know you occasionally recommend one of your favorite hiking workouts that I've seen pop up a couple of times. So could you tell us a little bit about that?
I might be slightly fanatical about lunges. I mean, to me, they're fantastic. They target foot strength. They target calf, upper and lower leg, hips, core. They're low load, so there's not a lot of weight going through your body, which may increase the chance of injury. They're high repetition, so they're great for tendon and ligament strength for ankles, knees, and low back. And they're easily scalable for just about anyone. If you're having knee pain, great, do a reverse lunge instead of a front lunge, or vary the step distance or the depth you drop down. I was recently giving a talk for a mountaineer group, and I came up with this track lunge program where you actually go to a high school track and you lunge around. So it's 400 meters around, and it takes me 15 to 17 minutes. And it's 420 lunges on the lane 6, which is the outside lap. But I've been doing them for a few years. I can usually kind of get through them without stopping. And I was mentioning to this group as well, we broke it down. So you're doing, essentially 50 lunges and 50 lunges. And they were kind of gasping. And I was like, it's really only 25 a leg, guys. It's not that bad. But I was like, wow, maybe my view of lunges is different than everyone else's.
Yeah, a little skewed there, maybe.
But it was that was one of my favorite workouts as we prepared for the Pacific Crest Trail. And my wife and I, neither one of us had any muscle aches or pains as we kind of assimilated to trail life. We started out doing 10 to 14 miles a day for the first 2 weeks, and then slowly added miles. So even though we had been training for a long time, we still took a break-in period and worked up to our regular mileage. And I think having the lunges under our belt was really helpful for that. No ankle issues, no knee pains for either of us, no hip pain. It just seemed like the magical exercise. So I've kind of adopted it as my unofficial mascot.
Yeah, well, fair enough. And again, it's such a simple thing for people to include. Maybe doing 400 lunges might be a bit intimidating for some, but to all,
yeah,
yeah, that's it.
You'll know if you've done too many.
Yeah, you know pretty quickly. All right. So, final question here. So, if there were any first-time hikers or trekkers listening to this, because I know there are quite a few people who are aspiring to get out on their first significant adventure for the first time, what's your number one piece of advice that you could give around their preparation?
Start early. So, you and I both recommend a minimum of 8 weeks. 12 to 16 would really be most ideal. And for some folks, that commitment might be a little bit much. But keep in mind that it takes your tendons and ligaments 270 days, so about 7 months to completely regenerate. So if you do just 8 weeks of exercise, that's about 2 months. So you've got a good start, but your tendons and ligaments aren't fully prepped. Like if you had been doing, hiking the year before you were going to go out and kind of building up that strength and that consistent stress to get good and strong. You can't start too early as far as like preparation goes. Anything you can do physically is going to help build your fitness level, which is going to decrease your risk for injury. And that's what's going to keep you on the trail and get you to your goal.
Yeah, beautiful. What was that, 274 days for rejuvenation?
Yeah, so Chris Summer, I think he's the U.S. gymnastics coach. He was in a podcast with Tim Ferriss, and he'd mentioned this stat, and I went back and listened to the podcast and looked it up, and it's around 270 days for that tissue to completely regenerate. So, if you're consistently exercising for that 6 to 7 months, providing that positive physical stress, as that tissue rebuilds and remodels, it's going to rebuild and remodel itself stronger and more robust than if you just did like exercise for 8 weeks and then did nothing for 8 weeks. You're not giving yourself enough of that stimulus to tell the body to change this tissue and make it stronger and more robust for the long term.
Okay, interesting. I'm going to have to look into that because I've never really heard anything like that. So yeah, I'm going to dig into that right after this interview. So there we go. Food for thought for myself. How good. So to finish things up, if any people wanted to get in contact with you, to ask you any questions, find your content, or even work with you, where can they find you and how can they go about that?
So I'm fairly active on the internet. I've got my home site, which is trailsidefitness.com. You'll find my social links in there for Facebook and Instagram. I'm at Trailside Fitness for Facebook, and then Instagram is at Trailside_fitness. We're working on putting our training program together, which will cover pre-hike training, and then during hike it will cover like recovery techniques, some nutrition stuff. And then post-hike, working on that recovery piece as well and mobility to just get everything loosened back up and back to normal post-hike. Target date for that is fall of 2019, and then we'll be doing some online training with that also. Currently, if you go to trailsidefitness.com, there's a free download, and that download will include my track lunge workout to get you up to 400 meters if you so desire. And there's also my top 3 tips for completing a long distance hike, being successful there. So yeah, definitely check that out.
Fantastic. Well, I'll put all the links to that stuff in the notes below. So if anyone does want to get involved in that, you can just scroll down and hopefully it should be all there. But yeah, well, thank you so much for coming on, Lee. There was some absolute golden advice in there for a whole bunch of different subjects. So I think the listeners can get some real quality value out of this. So I really appreciate you taking the time.
I really thank you for having me on. I appreciate it. It was a lot of fun.
Oh, fantastic, mate. Well, all the best, and we'll talk to you soon.
Sounds great. Thank you.
You've been listening to the Training for Trekking podcast. So if you've enjoyed this episode, please remember to subscribe, rate, and review us in iTunes. So thanks for getting involved, and we'll see you on the next one.